Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most eye-opening books in the world of psychology, Manipulation: Dark Psychology to Manipulate and Control People, by Arthur Horn. Now, before you click away, thinking this is some kind of shady how-to guide for villains, I want you to hear me out, because this book is something far more nuanced, far more intelligent, and far more useful than its title might suggest. Whether you have been manipulated before and didn't even know it, whether you're trying to become more persuasive in your professional life, or whether you simply want to understand the invisible psychological forces that govern human interaction every single day, this book is for you. So settle in, because we're about to go deep. Let's start at the very beginning. Arthur Horn opens this book with a question that sounds almost too simple. What is manipulation? You'd think we all know the answer, but here's the thing. Most of us think we understand manipulation, yet we can't actually define it. We use the word casually. We say things like, "He manipulated me," or "She's so manipulative," but we rarely stop to ask what exactly is happening when manipulation occurs. And if we can't define it precisely, we can't recognize it. We can't use it strategically, and more importantly, we can't defend ourselves against it. So Arthur Horn spends the early part of this book doing something that most psychology authors skip over. He builds a precise, working definition that will serve as the foundation for everything else. Horn distinguishes manipulation from two words that we often confuse it with: influence and persuasion. Now, these three concepts might sound like they belong to the same family, and in some ways they do, but they operate very differently. Influence, broadly speaking, is the general capacity one person has to affect another. When you walk into a room and your energy changes the mood of the people around you, that's influence. It can be entirely unconscious. You're not doing anything on purpose. You're just present, and people respond to you. Persuasion is a step further. Persuasion is intentional. When you try to convince someone to see your point of view using logic, evidence, and reasoned argument, you are persuading them. You are appealing to their rational mind and giving them the information they need to make a decision that you prefer. Crucially, the person being persuaded retains full awareness of what you're doing. They know you're making a case, they weigh it, and they decide. Their autonomy is intact. Manipulation, however, is something different altogether. Manipulation works below the surface. It bypasses rational thought. It doesn't give the other person all the information they need to make a fully informed choice. Instead, it leverages psychological triggers, emotional vulnerabilities, cognitive biases, and social dynamics to steer someone's behavior in a direction that serves your goals, often without them ever realizing that their behavior is being steered at all. That is the key distinction. Influence is passive, persuasion is open, manipulation is covert. And it is precisely that covert quality that makes manipulation both powerful and controversial. Now, here is where the book takes its first surprising turn. Horn argues that manipulation is not inherently evil. This is a claim that will make many people uncomfortable, but stay with me, because his argument is compelling. He points out that manipulation is deeply woven into the fabric of human civilization. Think about advertising. Every commercial you've ever watched, every billboard you've ever seen, every product placement in your favorite movie, these are all carefully engineered manipulation campaigns. Advertising agencies spend billions of dollars studying human psychology precisely so they can bypass your rational decision-making and create emotional associations that make you want to buy things you didn't even know you needed. And yet we live with advertising as a perfectly normal, legally accepted part of daily life. Horn then moves to military strategy. Throughout history, some of the most celebrated military commanders, people we study in universities and hold up as geniuses, were masters of manipulation. Deception campaigns, psychological warfare, fake retreats, the spreading of misinformation to confuse and demoralize the enemy. These weren't considered shameful tactics, they were considered brilliant. Sun Tzu built an entire philosophy of war around them. The concept that all warfare is deception is considered one of the great strategic insights in human history. And then there's the professional world. Every negotiation involves some degree of strategic information management. Every salary discussion, every business deal, every pitch to an investor involves framing, selective emphasis, and emotional engineering. The polished executive who knows how to manage up, the salesperson who knows exactly when to create urgency, the lawyer who knows how to present facts in the most favorable sequence. These are all practitioners of manipulation, and we don't just tolerate them, we promote them and pay them handsomely. Even in personal relationships, manipulation is present from the very first days of life. Horn makes the fascinating point that a newborn baby is already a master manipulator. When an infant cries, it is using a psychologically powerful signal, one that evolution has tuned specifically to be almost impossible for adults to ignore to get what it needs. The baby has no language, no logic, no reasoned argument. It simply activates an emotional response in its caregivers that compels them to act. That is textbook manipulation, and we don't call it evil, we call it adorable. Parents manipulate their children too, every single day, through systems of rewards and punishments, through strategic framing of choices, through the careful management of what information children receive. If you eat your vegetables, you can have dessert. That is manipulation with a benevolent goal. So Horn's point is not that manipulation is good. His point is that manipulation is a tool. And like any tool, its moral character depends almost entirely on how and why it is used. A hammer can build a home or break a skull. The hammer itself is neutral. Manipulation is the same. The ethics of manipulation, he argues, lie in the intent behind it and the effect it has on the person being manipulated. With that philosophical foundation laid, the book transitions into the real mechanics of how manipulation actually works. The first and most fundamental element is understanding goals. Horn breaks this down beautifully. Before you can even begin to think about manipulating anyone, you have to have extraordinary clarity about your own goals. Not vague wishes, not broad desires, but specific, well-defined objectives. What exactly do you want to happen? What does success look like? What are you willing to do to get there? And what are you not willing to do? Most people walk through life with a foggy sense of what they want, and that fog is a profound disadvantage in any situation involving human interaction. Clarity of purpose is the starting point of all effective action, manipulative or otherwise. But just as important as knowing your own goals is understanding the goals of the person you are dealing with. This is where Horn delivers what I consider the single most important insight in the entire book. He writes that the key to manipulation is using the goals of others to further your own. Read that again. The key to manipulation is using the goals of others to further your own. Think about the implications of that for a moment. It means that the most powerful manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation at all from the perspective of the person being manipulated. When you align your request with what someone already wants, when you frame your ask in terms of their own desires and objectives, they don't feel pushed or coerced or deceived. They feel like helping you is also helping themselves. The most elegant manipulation is indistinguishable from simple cooperation. This requires something that most people don't invest nearly enough time in: deeply understanding the people around you. What motivates them? What are they afraid of? What do they desire? What do they value? What do they resent? Horn emphasizes that you cannot manipulate effectively without this intelligence. And gathering this intelligence is not something you do in a single conversation. It is an ongoing process of observation, listening, and analysis that happens continuously in all your relationships. From goals, the book moves to the tools of manipulation. Horn identifies 4 primary tools, and together they form the complete arsenal of any skilled manipulator. The first is power. Power is the bedrock of manipulation. Without some form of power, whether that's social status, financial resources, information, expertise, emotional leverage, or control over something the other person needs, manipulation has no traction. Power can be built, acquired, and projected. And crucially, perceived power is almost as effective as real power. If you can make someone believe you have more power than you actually do, you achieve most of the same psychological effects. The second tool is persuasion. Now remember that Horn defined persuasion as distinct from manipulation, but he argues that persuasion is still a key tool within a manipulation strategy. You might use legitimate, rational persuasion as part of a broader campaign that also involves less transparent elements. Mixing persuasion with manipulation is actually one of the most effective approaches because it gives the target the feeling that they've arrived at a decision rationally, when in fact the emotional and psychological groundwork was laid long before the logical argument was ever made. The third tool is deception. This is where the book gets into truly dark territory, and Horn handles it with more honesty than most authors would. Deception is a core element of manipulation. It doesn't always mean outright lying. Deception can be as subtle as omitting information, as simple as choosing which truth to emphasize, as sophisticated as creating false impressions through technically accurate statements. What makes deception so powerful is that it exploits one of the fundamental social contracts of human interaction, the assumption that the people we're talking to are giving us an accurate picture of reality. When that assumption is violated by a skilled deceiver, the victim often doesn't even know to question what they've been told. Horn is careful to note that deception carries serious risks and ethical weight. Deception can destroy trust permanently if discovered. It can unravel entire relationships. And from a purely practical standpoint, maintaining a deceptive narrative requires ongoing effort and creates vulnerabilities that an honest approach would not. So, even from a coldly strategic perspective, setting aside morality entirely, deception should be deployed sparingly and carefully. The fourth tool is the exploitation of irrational behavior. Human beings, despite our self-image as rational creatures, are profoundly irrational in predictable and measurable ways. Cognitive biases are the engine of much of what we do. We are loss-averse, meaning we are more motivated to avoid losing something than to gain something of equivalent value. We are susceptible to social proof, meaning we look to what others are doing to guide our own behavior. We are vulnerable to authority, meaning we give disproportionate weight to the opinions and directives of people who project confidence and expertise. We are affected by scarcity. We want things more when we believe they are rare or running out. We are subject to the halo effect, meaning that attractiveness, charm, and charisma cause us to attribute positive qualities to people even when we have no evidence for those qualities. All of these biases can be identified, targeted, and activated by a skilled manipulator. And the reason they work so reliably is that they are deeply embedded in our psychology. They often operate below the level of conscious awareness. Horn then explores what he calls the manifestations of manipulation, the specific forms in which manipulation appears most commonly. The first and most ancient is what he calls the carrot and the stick. This is the fundamental reward-punishment framework that governs so much of human and animal behavior. The carrot is the promise of something desirable: approval, money, love, pleasure, success, belonging. The stick is the threat of something painful: rejection, punishment, shame, loss, suffering. Skilled manipulators understand intuitively which motivator works best with each person, and they calibrate accordingly. Some people are more carrot-driven, responding to positive incentives and visions of reward. Others are more stick-driven, motivated primarily by the desire to avoid negative consequences. Misidentifying which you're dealing with is one of the most common and costly mistakes in interpersonal influence. Emotional manipulation is the next major manifestation, and it deserves careful attention because it is simultaneously the most powerful and the most commonly misunderstood form of influence. Emotional manipulation doesn't mean simply making someone feel good or bad. It is the systematic targeting of someone's emotional state in order to bypass their rational judgment. Guilt is one of the most potent tools in the emotional manipulator's kit. When someone can make you feel responsible for their suffering, even if you are not, they gain enormous leverage over your behavior. Shame operates similarly. It attacks your sense of self-worth and creates a powerful motivation to restore your self-image by complying with what the manipulator wants. Fear is another weapon, not necessarily physical fear, but social fear, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment. And then there is love, the most complex emotional lever of all, capable of generating both the most extraordinary acts of generosity and the most devastating acts of compliance in all of human experience. Horn then turns to charisma, and this is one of the most fascinating sections of the book, because charisma is something we all recognize, but almost nobody can define. We know a charismatic person when we meet one. There's something magnetic about them, something that draws us in, that makes us want to be near them and to please them. But what exactly is happening when charisma works on us? Horn argues that charisma is not a mysterious gift that some people are born with and others are denied. It is a set of learnable behaviors and psychological techniques that create specific emotional responses in others. Eye contact held just a beat longer than usual. The art of making someone feel like they are the most interesting person in the room. The ability to tell stories that lodge in the memory. Confidence projected through posture, voice, and pacing. Emotional warmth that makes people feel seen and valued. These are all skills, and they are all forms of manipulation, in the precise sense Horn has defined. They are techniques for influencing behavior by bypassing rational analysis and operating directly on emotion and psychology. Naturally, after spending so much time on the tools and methods of manipulation, the book arrives at its ethical reckoning. And this chapter is one of the most important in the entire work. Horn doesn't dodge the hard questions. He asks them directly. When is manipulation acceptable, and when does it cross a line? His framework rests on three key considerations: deception, abuse, and honor. Deception, as we've discussed, carries intrinsic risks and moral weight. But Horn argues that not all deception is equally wrong. A white lie to spare someone unnecessary pain is different from a sustained campaign of misinformation designed to ruin someone's life. Context matters enormously. Abuse is where the hard line is drawn. The moment manipulation causes genuine psychological harm, the moment it is used to exploit vulnerability, destroy self-esteem, undermine someone's ability to function, or make independent decisions, it has crossed from a gray area into something that Horn clearly identifies as wrong. Emotional abuse, coercive control, gaslighting, and psychological exploitation are not sophisticated manipulation techniques. They are forms of harm. The fact that they use psychological rather than physical mechanisms doesn't make them any less destructive. And then there is honor. This is perhaps the most subjective element of Horn's ethical framework, but also the most human. Honor asks, what kind of person do you want to be? What lines will you not cross? Not because you fear legal consequences or social repercussions, but because crossing them would require you to become someone you do not respect. Honor is your internal ethical standard, the code you hold yourself to when no one is watching. Horn argues that the most effective manipulators in the long run are those who maintain a strong sense of personal honor, not because it makes them nicer people, but because it makes them more trustworthy, more sustainable in their influence, and more capable of building the kinds of relationships and reputations that give them genuine, durable power. The book also addresses the question of ends versus means head-on. Can a good outcome justify manipulative means? Horn doesn't give a simple answer because there isn't one. He asks you to consider whether the ends you're pursuing are genuinely good for others, not just rationalized as such, and whether the means you're employing cause damage that outweighs the good you're trying to achieve. This is a question philosophers have wrestled with for centuries, and Horn doesn't pretend to have solved it. But he insists that asking the question honestly and answering it honestly is a moral obligation for anyone who chooses to use manipulation consciously. Intent, Horn argues, is crucial. The same action, say, creating a sense of urgency in a conversation, can be manipulation for personal gain at someone else's expense, or it can be a technique for helping someone overcome procrastination on something that genuinely serves their interests. The external behavior looks identical. The moral character of that behavior depends on what's happening inside the person performing it. Now we come to the methodology section, which is in many ways the heart of the book's practical value. Horn outlines a 6-step process for developing and executing a manipulation strategy. And I want to walk you through each step carefully because this framework is applicable far beyond anything most people would call manipulation. It's really a framework for achieving goals through other people, which is the essence of leadership, negotiation, sales, parenting, and any other domain where human influence matters. Step 1 is defining your goals. We've touched on this already, but Horn goes deeper here. He pushes you to be specific not just about what you want, but about what the constraints are. What are you unwilling to do? What would constitute a failure? What is the minimum acceptable outcome? Clear goal definition is what separates purposeful action from improvised reaction. Most people go into interactions with only the haziest sense of what they actually want to achieve, and they wonder later why the interaction didn't go the way they hope. Step 2 is mapping out your paths to success. Given your goal, what are the possible routes to getting there? Who do you need to influence, and in what way? What resources do you have available? What are the dependencies, the things that need to happen before other things can happen? This step is fundamentally strategic. It's where you play out scenarios in your mind, identify the leverage points, and begin to see the situation not just as it is, but as a map of possibilities. Step 3 is gathering information. This is where the intelligence work happens. Who is the person or people you're trying to influence? What are their goals, their fears, their desires, their current emotional state, their relationships, their history? The more you know about someone, the more precisely you can calibrate your approach. And crucially, information gathering should be ongoing. You don't do it once before an interaction and then stop. Every conversation reveals new data. Every interaction is an opportunity to learn something that updates your understanding of the person you're dealing with. Step 4 is identifying opportunities and threats. Given everything you know, what factors work in your favor? An opportunity might be that the person is currently anxious about something your proposal can help solve. A threat might be that someone else is trying to influence the same person in a direction that conflicts with yours. Opportunities tell you where to push. Threats tell you where to guard or where to manage competing influences. Step 5 is taking action. This is where the rubber meets the road. All the analysis and planning in the world means nothing if you don't actually do something. Horn emphasizes that the action step is where most people fail, not because they don't know what to do, but because they hesitate, second guess, or wait for perfect conditions that never arrive. Effective manipulation, like effective leadership, requires a willingness to act in conditions of uncertainty. Step 6 is learning and improving. After every significant interaction, Horn advocates for deliberate reflection. What worked? What didn't? Why? What would you do differently? This self-analytical discipline is what separates someone who reads a book about psychology and thinks they understand manipulation from someone who actually becomes skilled at it. Skill is not acquired through knowledge alone. It is acquired through practice, feedback, and the kind of honest self-assessment that most people find uncomfortable. This brings us to the analysis section of the book, which covers 3 interconnected capabilities: self-analysis, analyzing others, and the practical techniques of cold reading and body language. Self-analysis is where Horn begins, and the reason is important. You cannot understand and influence others if you don't understand yourself. Your own biases, your own emotional triggers, your own blind spots. All of these affect how you perceive situations, how you react to people, and ultimately how effective you are in any form of influence. The manipulator who doesn't understand their own psychology is constantly being managed by it. The fears and desires and patterns you haven't examined are the levers other people can use on you without you ever realizing it. Analyzing others is a skill that improves with dedicated practice and honest attention. Horn argues that most of us are shockingly poor at understanding other people, Not because we lack the raw intelligence, but because we spend most of our time in interactions focused on ourselves, on what we're going to say next, on how we're coming across, on managing our own emotions. The first discipline of effective analysis is simply to shift that focus outward. Listen more, watch more, ask more questions than you answer. And when you observe, do so without immediately filtering what you see through your own assumptions and biases. Seek to understand what the other person is actually experiencing, not what you would experience if you were in their position. Cold reading is a technique most famously associated with mentalists and psychic performers, but Horn treats it as a serious psychological skill. Cold reading is the ability to make accurate assessments of a person based on observable information: their appearance, their posture, their speech patterns, their word choice, their microexpressions, the objects they carry, their social context. A skilled cold reader can walk into a room and in a matter of minutes have meaningful working hypotheses about who each person is, what they want, what they're feeling, and how they're likely to behave. This isn't magic. It's pattern recognition trained through observation and study. Body language is the final analytical tool the book covers in depth, and it's a rich topic that Horn gives real substance to. The human body communicates constantly, involuntarily, and with a degree of honesty that our words often don't match. Crossed arms can signal defensiveness or discomfort. Leaning in signals interest and engagement. Touching the face, especially during certain kinds of statements, can signal discomfort or deception, though Horn is careful to note that no single body language signal is definitive. Context is everything. A person who crosses their arms while talking to you might simply be cold. The value of body language reading is not in individual signals, but in clusters and deviations from baseline. When you know how someone normally holds their body, normally uses their eyes, normally manages their hands, then any deviation from that baseline becomes a signal worth noting and investigating. Facial expressions are a particularly rich source of information, and Horn discusses the work underlying microexpressions, those fleeting, involuntary expressions that cross the face in fractions of a second and reveal genuine emotional states that people are often trying to conceal. Surprise, fear, disgust, contempt, anger, happiness, and sadness all have distinct facial signatures, and these signatures are largely universal across human cultures. Learning to read them quickly and accurately is a skill that gives you access to information that people are often not aware they're transmitting. One of the most powerful insights in the body language section is the idea of congruence, the alignment between what someone says and how their body behaves as they say it. When someone tells you they're excited about your idea, but their shoulders are slightly hunched, their eye contact is minimal, and their voice lacks energy, the body is telling a different story than the words. Learning to notice these incongruences and to gently investigate rather than immediately challenging or dismissing them is one of the most valuable interpersonal skills you can develop. Now, as we come toward the final stretch of the book, I want to bring all of these threads together with the theme that I believe is Horn's most enduring and most practically valuable contribution: the idea that understanding manipulation is ultimately about becoming harder to manipulate. Everything the book teaches about how influence works, about the psychological levers that shape human behavior, about the ways emotion and bias and self-interest cause people to act against their own conscious intentions, All of that knowledge is defensive armor as much as it is offensive weaponry. When you understand how the carrot and the stick work, you can recognize when someone is using them on you and choose consciously how to respond rather than reacting automatically. When you understand emotional manipulation, you can catch yourself in the moment when guilt or fear or shame is being activated artificially, and ask whether the emotion you're feeling is a genuine response to reality or a manufactured response to someone else's agenda. Horn makes the profound observation that recognizing manipulative behaviors in other people not only protects you against their influence, it also reveals their goals. Every manipulation attempt is a confession. It tells you what the person doing it wants, what they think your vulnerabilities are, and what they believe they can get from you. An unsuccessful manipulation attempt, recognized and understood, is actually information goldmine. This is also where the book's ethical framework comes full circle. The goal of developing your understanding of dark psychology is not to become a predator. It is to become someone who can operate in the real world, which contains predators, which contains manipulators, which contains people who will use your emotions and your kindness and your cognitive biases against you without a second thought, with clear eyes, a steady mind, and the knowledge to protect yourself and the people you care about. There's a maturity to Horn's approach that I really want to highlight before we close out. He is honest about the book's limitations. He doesn't promise you shortcuts. He doesn't claim you'll be able to make anyone do anything with a magic phrase. He doesn't offer the kind of pseudo-scientific garbage that clutters a lot of this genre, the fake mind control techniques, the supposed secrets of NLP that will hypnotize anyone within 30 seconds. What he offers instead is a rigorous, honest, intellectually serious framework for thinking about human influence, and he acknowledges repeatedly that effective manipulation requires practice, requires genuine intelligence, requires the ability to observe and adapt and learn from failure. It is a craft, not a formula. What I find most valuable about this book, having read it carefully, is not the manipulation techniques themselves. It's the shift in perspective it produces. After reading this, you start to see the social world differently. You start to see the invisible architecture of human interaction, the goals and fears and desires that are always present but rarely spoken. The ways in which behavior is constantly being shaped by forces that operate below conscious awareness. The degree to which what we think of as our free choices are actually deeply conditioned responses to social and psychological stimuli. That expanded awareness doesn't make you paranoid, it makes you more intentional. It makes you more deliberate about the kind of influence you want to have on the people around you, and it makes you much, much harder to fool. To bring everything together, Arthur Horn's Dark Psychology to Manipulate and Control People is a book about power. The power that flows through human relationships, the psychological mechanisms that create and transmit that power, and the responsibility that comes with understanding it. Manipulation is not the exclusive province of villains. It is a fundamental feature of human social life, present in every relationship and every institution. The question is not whether you will participate in it, because you already are. The question is whether you will participate consciously, ethically, and with genuine understanding, or whether you will sleepwalk through a world where others are doing it to you and you don't even know it. This book won't make you a master manipulator overnight, but it will open your eyes in ways they cannot be closed again. And in a world where influence is power, open eyes are the most valuable thing you can have. If this summary gave you value, hit the like button and subscribe for more book breakdowns just like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever recognized a manipulation attempt in your own life after the fact? What tipped you off? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and stay sharp.